the man who flatters his neighbor spreads a net for his own feet. And so we've talked a lot about the idea of wickedness and sin. And who does it hurt first? Or the most? Yourself, right? You hurt people around you. But what we see here, the same principle we've looked at over and over again, is the man who flatters his neighbor spreads a net for his own feet. And so we talked about this, I think it was last week, about the idea of, maybe it was the week before, about saying, making sure that your words of praise were well heard, right? And the problem with that you were doing that with for the wrong reason or the wrong purpose, similar here. And so we think about maybe a sin of the tongue. We need to be careful with that. So we think about that in section 11. Verse 6, by transgression, the evil man is snared, but the righteous sings and rejoices. And so we see the two parts of this. Who's ensnared by your transgression? I am the one that's going to be ensnared by my transgression. And who's going to celebrate? Who's going to celebrate? Well, those around us, right? When we do the wrong thing, when we're that type of individual, the evil man, are people going to like us? They're going to be glad to see our end. And so you think about that. Should we be, as Christians, we think about this attitude as we're studying through the Proverbs and wisdom for godly people. Should we be excited about people's destruction? No. But when people who are wicked, when they stop, or when they are stopped from their wickedness or by their wickedness, they get stopped. Is that a time to celebrate? You think about Saul. I think we talked about this last week just a little bit. Saul, how did they stop Saul? He became a Christian, right? And so the wickedness that he was practicing ended when he became a Christian. And so we think about this. Maybe section 6 about hatred. We need to learn to have the proper attitude about this, but we know that people aren't excited about a wicked individual and the harm that they cause. Verse 7 says, the righteousness considers the cause of the poor, but the wicked does not understand such knowledge. And so the idea of this verse is compassion, isn't it? We think about compassion. Are there some people that aren't compassionate? Who do they look out for? Themselves. Always first, right? And you think about that. The righteous considers the cause of the poor. When we help the poor, what is it always going to do to us? It's always going to take something away from us. That's the case, okay? But the wicked, they don't understand what? The need to take care of the poor, right? Are there any poor in the Bible that we read about, that we know about? Name some examples if you think about poor people that were taken care of. Ruth. I didn't think about Ruth. Ruth's a good example. And who had compassion on her? Boaz. Now, that's an interesting one you brought up because you think about that. And so she was there to help, right? There's a benefit that he was going to gain, but he was taking care of her also, especially, right? And so we see that. That's a good point. So we think about that. Maybe section 26, righteousness. The righteous considers the poor. Verse 8, scoffers set a city aflame, but wise men turn away wrath. And so the phrase I thought about is there's destruction in their they leave destruction everywhere they've been, right? You know people like that? Yeah, we know people like that. So a scoffer sets the city aflame, but the wise men do what? Turn away wrath. And so they tone things down, right? They're a mediator. Example of Daniel. We go to the book of Daniel. We won't go there, but just think about Daniel. There's a time when Nebuchadnezzar was killing all the wise men, and Daniel found out what was happening, and what did he do? Paraphrase, but he said, whoa. Let's go to Nebuchadnezzar and see if we can work this out, right? You think about that. That's the type of principle, the individual. So section 1 maybe, wisdom would be a good place to put this. Or section 24, the words of the wise, the way they say things. They turn away wrath. Verse 9 says, if a wise man contends with a foolish man, whether the fool rages or laughs, there is no peace. What's the principle here? If the wise man contends with a foolish man. It's not going to get anywhere. Have you ever met someone that there's no use arguing with? Yeah, right? Whether they're right or wrong, whether you're right or wrong, it doesn't matter, right? It's not going to change a thing. And so the wise man, if a wise man contends with a foolish man, I think there may be, the verse is talking about maybe a possibility of lack of wisdom for the wise man, right? Because whether fool rages or laughs, there's no what? It's not going to change anything, because the fool is going to constantly stir the pot. A pot stir is what we think about. And so, again, think about words of the wise, maybe section 24, a good place to put that. The words of the wise, sometimes the wisest words we'll ever speak are what? No words at all. Okay, we think about that. Verse 10, the bloodthirsty hate the blameless, but the upright seek the well-being. And so we just talked about 3 verses ago about the poor, compassion towards the poor. Who's the bloodthirsty? They're out to get anybody and everybody because that's who they are and what they are. So the bloodthirsty hate the who? Yeah, the righteous. And again, I know we mentioned this, Ahab and Elijah. Did Ahab like Elijah? No. Why didn't Ahab like Elijah? Because he was just a good guy. And when you put a good guy next to an evil guy, you have an evil guy that's over here by himself. He said, well, he's just an evil guy. But when you put somebody like Elijah next to him, how's the evil guy look? Worse. Terrible, right? So the principle, we think about this, the bloodthirsty hate the blameless, but the upright seek what? Well-being, right? The righteous are going to seek the upright, the righteous. Who are they going to seek the well-being of? Now you think about that. Go back and you think about Elijah and Ahab, and I think this verse fits with that situation well. What ill will did Elijah have towards Ahab?
His wife was the ill will that really exaggerated.
Okay.
For Elijah. So Ahab had to contend with, he was evil, but he had somebody prodding him on.
Putting him on, yeah.
He
But
might have wanted to be, he might have liked Elijah.
Maybe.
You know,
But what I was thinking about is, what ill will did Elijah have towards? He didn't want to see Ahab fail. He wanted him to see him be a better king, a righteous king of the nation. That's what he wanted.
Well, the righteous are always concerned about everybody's soul.
Mm-hmm.
Which would be the well-being.
That's right. Yeah. You think, how would you like to be Ananias and say, and when God sent to the house called Straight to meet a man named Saul? How'd you like to be that guy? And so what was his job? To convert Paul, right? Or Saul. And so he went for the, would that be a scary mission to go on? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Was he like Jonah? What did Jonah do when Nineveh repented? You see Ananias, you remember when Ananias got mad at Paul? He didn't, right? Doesn't tell us that he did. He taught him about salvation. Okay, so we see that. And so righteousness, also joy and fulfilled life. I think the unrighteous don't like the righteous because the righteous are content, right? So we think about that. A fool vents all his feelings, but a wise man holds them back. And so there's that individual that will never say anything, but finally when they say something, who listens? Everybody. Right. When enough's enough and they step up and something said, everybody listens. I think that's the characteristic we see here. They finally, the words, and most of the time it's those type of people, what comes out? Words of wisdom. Okay. So what do you think about that? They know how to use their tongue. It's hard to know exactly what section to put that one under. But anyway, think about that. Words of the wise maybe would be a good place to put that. If a ruler pays attention to lies, all his servants become what? Wicked. Okay. And so, to reward wickedness, what comes about? More wickedness. There's no end to that. And so, that'd be the opposite of righteousness. So, verse 13, a poor man and the oppressor have this in common. The Lord gives light to the eyes of them both. And so, no matter which side of the coin you're on, who's the one that put you there? God, right? Do we think about that? Remember in the Garden of Eden with Adam, and Adam was given the responsibility, the job of naming all the animals. What was the importance of naming all the animals? Just so you know, the important part wasn't naming all the animals. What was the important part?
Trying to find him a mate, right?
Yeah, for him to realize that he was alone. Okay, for him to realize that he was alone, and then when Eve came along, right? God presented Eve. What was his attitude towards her? You remember? Adam said, "Get out of my garden. God gave me this place." What did he say? He said, "Now this is what? Bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh." You think about that. And so he was excited that she was there because she was a what? A helpmeet. Okay, that's right. I was thinking a gift from God, right? And we know that both Adam and Eve, God both did what? He breathed into them the breath of life, and they became a living soul. And so Adam and Eve were equal in the sense, I want to talk about that they were both created in the image of God, right? And we understand that in the home, the family, that God gave Adam and Eve special responsibilities. But as far as them being created in the image of God, and both being created with souls, what were they? They were equal, right? Just like Christians today. We're all equally entitled to the same salvation, right? In the church, we have different responsibilities. Some of our responsibilities are restricted to men or women, right? We understand that. But we're all equal. And so when we think about this, what we have here is the Lord gives light to both who? What we're talking about in verse 13, the poor man and the oppressor have this in common. God made them both. Okay. And so the oppressor is being described as an oppressor over the poor. Should he be an oppressor over the poor? No. God made them both. And they're both special to God. We think about the rich man and Lazarus. Which one did God? Got to be careful how we word this. God doesn't show favoritism, right? Doesn't show favoritism. But which one was it in Abraham's bosom? And why?
Righteous.
Because he's righteous. Wealth had nothing to do with it.
One got a reward and one didn't get a very good reward.
So that's one example where we see, and this, a lot of times people who have more think that they should be lords over those who have what? Less, right? Another example of that, when you get to James chapter 2, the first 13 verses there deal with the attitude that was in the church at that time, that the wealthy should get a better seat in the congregation. right? Or receive a seat. And they're rebuked for that, right? Because we're all equal in Christ. And so we need to keep that in mind. Maybe section 27, joy and fulfilled life. We need to realize that we're all created in the image of God. 14, the king who judges the poor with truth, his throne will be established forever. And so Solomon's trying to tell his son, and we're passing this on to you. If you do what you're supposed to do, this throne will do what? Remain. Right? Did that happen? Not for very long, right? Anyway, think about that. Think about that. Righteousness. Righteousness is important. Verse 15, the rod and rebuke give wisdom, but a child left to himself brings shame to his mother. Today in our society, we've talked about this 100 times, we think that the best way to raise children is without discipline. Is that the case? No, not the case. Okay. So they need discipline, direction. Training is a good way to put that, right? Training. Verse 16, or parenting children, a good place to put that, or home life in your sections. When the wicked, verse 16, when the wicked are multiplied, transgression increases, but the righteous will see their fall. Think about Noah. I think that Noah, if Noah was a righteous man, which we know he was, when he was on that ark, he had to have mixed emotions. You think about that. I think that being on the ark was a very, very bittersweet experience. Why? Who was saved? Him and his children and their wives. Think about the blessing of that. But a righteous man would also be thinking about what? Those that weren't. Right? So you think about that. The wicked are multiplied, transgression increases, but the righteous will ultimately see their what? Fall. The hope is that we can convert them before that comes. Okay. Again, righteousness, lots of righteousness talked about in this chapter. Verse 17, correct your son, and he will give you rest. Yes, he will give delight to your soul. And so if you want to have peace, we need to raise our children what? We talk about the book of Proverbs being rules of thumbs, right? What's a rule of thumb? Yeah, got it. Most of the time, this is the result, right? When you do this, this is the normal outcome. And when we talk about this, there's always exceptions to the rule, right? We understand if we live a righteous life, statistically speaking, righteous are going to live longer than unrighteous, right? Because we're talking about harder living, harder on our bodies, because of chemicals, and there's a lot of things that go into that, right? They'll shorten our lifespan. So the rule of thumb, but sometimes righteous people, we say, die prematurely, right? And so you think about that. Correct your son, and he will give you rest. Yes, he will give you delight to your soul. When we talk about this, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he'll not depart from it. Sometimes we can't explain why some children do the things they do, right? Can't explain that. But what are we told? We should raise our children a certain way, and this will be the outcome. This will be the blessing of this. And so we have responsibility, don't we? And so correct your son, which we don't do in this nation like we should. Okay. All right, parents and children, again, a good place to put this. Verse 18, there will be no revelation. The people will cast off restraint, but happy is he who keeps what? Happy is the servant who keeps the law, right? A lot of times, and I think I'm guilty of this sometimes when I talk about the Proverbs, especially with people say, if we just read the Proverbs and use it as a guide for life, think about all the benefit that we have in our nation, the changes. But we really need to think that these are not suggestions. Where are they? Solomon's writing them as instructions in righteousness. And so you think about that and the benefit of that. Where there is no revelation. What's revelation? We're not talking about the book. This was written not quite 1,000 years before this, right? What's revelation? to unveil, to reveal. Now, what's God revealed to us through His Word? Righteousness. Okay, and so where there's no revelation, people cast off restraint. And you go to the book of Judges, when people did not know God's laws, they did that which was right in whose eyes? Their own eyes. So that's the problem there. And so if we want to have joy and fulfilled life, we need to keep the law. Verse 19, a servant will not be corrected by mere words, for though he understands, he will not respond. What is a servant? What's the difference between a servant and a master?
This one says a slave.
Slave, yeah. What's the difference? Answers to somebody. Joseph, which one was he?
He was a slave and a master.
Slave and master. What did he end up being? What did he always end up being? A ruler. Why? Well, because he's a good leader. Not quite the answer we're looking for. You're right, but what made him a good leader? What's that? Yeah, because he was a good slave. He was disciplined, right? And so this is talking about the mindset of a servant. And we're not talking about the proper mindset as we as Christians being servants. What he's talking about, they don't want to learn to better themselves, right? And so when Joseph, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, we talk about all these individuals, when they were put in a servant role, what did they end up being? A master. Because they didn't have the attitude that's being talked about in this verse, right? And so you think about on this earth, as Christians, what are we called to be? Servants. What's the reward for that? Right. We're going to be. Is it here? It's not here, right? But in next life, right? We'll be exalted. So we think about that principle. Anyway, verse 20. Do you see a man hasty in his words? There is more hope for a fool than for him. And so we say a person that runs their mouth, right? We need to learn to control the tongue. And that's a sign of what? Wisdom, right? That's something that is difficult to do. And James talks about that, right? A person that's able to control his tongue can also control what? His whole body. So that's important. All right. We go on, verse 21. He who pampers his servant from childhood will have him as a son in the end. And so, in our nation, we had slavery, right? Which came to an end. And the nation of Israel had slavery. What was the difference? What the laws that God set in order when they were leaving? You got the nation of Israel, when they left Egypt, what were they? Slaves, right? And what we read about from the little information that's given in the beginning of Exodus is the Egyptians were not treating the Hebrew people how? Not treating them well, were they? Okay, they're being oppressed. So then, when they leave, does God forbid His nation from having slaves? Because what does He do? What does He do?
They can have slaves, but after a certain period of time, then the slaves get their freedom.
Okay, that's one of the laws. Here's the thing: they were forbidden from oppressing them. You think about that. They were forbidden from oppressing them. They had to care for them. They had to have compassion towards them, right? And so you think about that. And so today, do we have slavery?
I mean, if it's a human institution, we don't have it, but we are slaves.
Well, we are slaves. Here's the point I'm thinking about when I think about this is our labor laws, I believe, reflect a lot of the Old Testament principles of how the servants, because slave's a bad word, right? We don't want to use that word. But slaves, servant, employee, there's a lot of similarities, right? And so a servant, we've talked about an indentured servant. What's indentured servant mean?
Just for a certain amount of time, they were enslaved.
Okay, but they had to be, right? They had to be. How many of us have to be employees? How many of you just decide not to go to work tomorrow?
If I have a job.
It'd be nice, right? We'd lose everything we had. Okay. You're not going. Justice says you're going. Anyway,
I took tomorrow off. It was a holiday.
let's go back and read this verse again. He who pampers his servant from childhood will have him as a son in the end. Why would you gain a son in the end? How many of us have ever known somebody that was being adopted? And I'm not talking about legally as a child, but when you have someone that's older than them that sees this person, and maybe they don't have children, or they're, you see it sometimes with farms. Sometimes somebody will take in someone and say, they're like a child to me, right? Why would that happen? Why would the servant say they're like a dad to me or mom to me? What would cause that?
Being treated well,
Be-
being respected.
Because the master was treating the slave the way that God wanted them to. And so when we talk about the slavery in our nation, the problem was you had some people who weren't treating their servants the way God required them to. And so this is a difficult subject to talk about because we always look down on slavery so much. What we look down on is we look at the abuse and the misuse, right? Because there were some horrible things that happened, right? We also have to realize in our nation that there are some people that treated their servants, slaves, better than some people treat their employees today. We never talk about that, but that's a fact. Anyway, something else to know is the Bible never, and I'm not trying to get rid of 13th Amendment, right? We have to realize that the Bible never condemns slavery. It condemns the misuse and mistreatment of a servant, right? So think about that. Because I've heard people say that, I've heard people preach about the sin of slavery, right? What's that?
Then it'd be a sin to serve God.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah. Most people don't connect the dots there. So, anyway. All right. We're not making very far, are we? Verse 22, an angry man stirs up strife, and a furious man abounds in transgression. Again, we're talking about maybe the human heart, the heart of hatred. That's a fool or a wicked man, so we think about that. Goes on, verse 22, similar. A man's pride will bring him low, but the humble in spirit will retain honor. And so we have the right attitude, just like we talked about some of the servants, slaves that were in the Bible. What did they always become? Masters with the right attitude, so that happens. Verse 24, whoever is a partner with a thief hates his own life. He swears to tell the truth, but reveals what? Nothing. We think about our judicial system today, and so if you get caught with a thief, are you guilty? Have you ever heard the phrase, I just drove the getaway car? Right. You're a part of it, right? And so, I like watching some of those police shows and cop shows, and you have people that help dispose of the body, right? They'll get charged with murder because they didn't do anything to stop it. They knew what was happening. I'm going to sit in the car. I'm going to stay outside. And so you look at that, you get caught up in that. And so you're a partner, and when you're a partner, you hate your life. You will. And so you swear to tell the truth, but you won't reveal nothing because you know you're what? Guilty. And so we tell our young people, we tell our older people too, be careful who you do what? Associate with. Okay? So think about that.
Mean that they're trying to protect somebody. Either that or they're scared to death or something.
Yeah, protect somebody for what reason? You think about that.
Well, think about it with your son. Your son killed somebody.
Mm-hmm.
You know, or you have to go through that, well, I gotta turn him in, or I don't gotta turn him in, or, you know, just lie for him a little bit. They're trying to protect him, because they know what's gonna happen. So the truth comes out.
And sometimes, like Kathy mentioned, sometimes we get caught up in that innocently, don't we? But most people don't. Those are the rare occasions, aren't they? And so if we surround ourselves with righteous people, as a rule of thumb from the Proverbs, are we going to worry about telling the truth and protecting people? Shouldn't have to worry about that. Okay. And the truth always does what? Always rises to the surface. It may be cloudy, hazy, foggy for a long time, but eventually what happens? Yeah, sometimes you hear parents say after 30 or 40 years, that's what happened. Right? Hear that. Okay, watch out, Aaron. It's coming out. Got 2 minutes. Try to finish this up. Verse 25, the fear of a man brings a snare. The fear of a man brings a snare, but whoever trusts the Lord will be safe. And so we looked earlier that the guilty run when no one pursues. Same principle, right? Our fear will get caught up, make a mistake that will convict us, but whoever trusts the Lord will be safe. Verse 26, many seek the ruler's favor, but justice of man comes from the Lord. Who should we be seeking to please? Yeah, and I think that there's so many things. I know I keep mentioning Elijah and Ahab. Who was Elijah trying to make happy? God, right? Did it matter whether Ahab was happy or not? Could Ahab have been happy? Right? But too many times, sometimes we as Christians, we try to appease the wicked, don't we? And we need to appease God. That's who we need to worry about. Verse 27, an unjust man is an abomination to the righteous, and he who is upright in his way is an abomination to the wicked. And so what do we say? Oil and water don't what? Yeah. Righteousness and unrighteousness are like oil and water. They do not mix. There's a doctrine called situation ethics. Who knows what situation ethics is?
It's a hard class, I think.
What's that?
Isn't that a hard class?
That's a hard class. Yeah. Situation ethics is a false doctrine that it's okay in certain circumstances to commit sin, right? That's where the white lie comes in, the principle of white lie. Well, it might hurt this person's feelings if I told them the truth, so what am I going to do? Tell them a lie. Heard a conversation on a phone one time, and somebody was talking, and they're talking to their preacher on the phone, and the spouse was sitting across the table and making some strange faces, and when the one spouse hung up the phone, the other spouse looked at them, and the spouse that was on the phone says, what was I supposed to say? I couldn't tell him the truth. Anyway, interesting, right? And so the right's always right. All right, we'll end there. 30 next week. I will not be here. Andy's planning on taking class, so that'll be good for you guys. And we'll finish up Proverbs shortly after that. Thank you.